Good morning, everyone. So today we are going to discuss one important concept called Spring Mvc module here. So in the last class, we identified how this particular Spring transaction is working, and we identify the programmatic transaction and declarative transaction. So today we are going to work with Spring Mvc module here. So to work with the Spring Mvc module, so how exactly which is going to work, and what is the flow of execution of this particular Spring MVC. So basically, using this particular Spring MVC application, sorry, Spring MVC module, so we are going to develop the web-based application here. So web-based application is nothing but we will have a UI pages here, cutting the point. So we'll have a UI pages. From the UI pages, we'll try to connect it with our server, like the backend application. And from the backend application, we are going to connect it with the database here. So now you can see, so this is our database here. So this is the way we are going to communicate with our application from the UI to our backend application. So here we are going to implement the Java code. So here we will implement the Java code. From the Java code, we are trying to connect it with our database. So this is, we can call it as a DB. Getting the point. Now, so this totally comes under the Spring MVC module here. So using this particular Spring MVC, we'll try to focus on the UI pages and as well as our Java classes here. And from the Java classes, we used to connect it with our databases here. We already identified this particular part here. This particular part we already identified here because we created service classes and we connected with the database to insert the record and to update the record here. But only the difference here, so using this particular UI pages, again we are going to connect it with our Java classes. Getting the point. So to connect with the Java classes, we used to connect with our controller classes. So how we are going to write this particular controller classes? So before writing this particular controller classes, we need to understand here how the flow of execution of this particular Spring MVC model, which is going to work here. Now first we need to understand this particular model here. Okay. And basically, using this particular Spring MVC, we used to work with the annotation example here. Basically, internally, we are going to work on the URL related applications here. So to work on the URL related application, we need to provide some of the annotations here. So what are the annotations we are going to work? We'll try to focus on those annotations here. And before going to provide those annotations here, first we need to understand here how exactly this particular application system, like a Spring module, is going to work here. So to understand here, basically, so whenever we send in a request from the UI pages, so you can see this is our UI pages here. Now what we are doing here, so basically Spring Boot MVC and Spring MVC same, but only the difference here, in the Spring Boot we are not going to work with the XML configurations here, and directly, so we are having the basic configuration classes, because in the Spring Boot most of the configuration is eliminated here. By default, Spring Boot is going to provide the configuration here, but after the configuration, everything we are going to work as a Spring Boot. Okay, we have a more information after this particular Spring, how exactly the Spring Boot is going to work. So back to here, now just for understanding here, now you can see this is our UI pages. So UI pages is nothing but, it's like one of our HTML file. So something called home.html from our, so we can call it as a home.html. Cutting the point. So now what you are understanding here, so this particular home.html is nothing but a UI page. So from the UI page, how we are going to send in a request. So for example, we are having the button called submit here. We are having the button called submit here. If I am going to click on this particular submit button, now what happens internally? We are going to send in a request here. Getting the point. So where this particular request will receive, like where this particular request will go. Getting the point. So basically, in the Spring MVC, we are having the main important controller, so that is called dispatcher service. So dispatcher services. So this is very important here. We need to understand here. dispatches alert. Basically, whenever we are trying to send in a request from this particular UI page, the request will go to the dispatches alert. Now, the dispatches alert will handle this particular request information. So inside this particular request information, we'll try to provide the information here. So what we are trying to do from the backend, like the server side here, getting the point. So based on the what we want to implement the code, we are going to provide the information in the request body, getting the point. So as a dispatcher alert, what it will do, it will try to identify the information which is sent by the UI page. So based on those information, it will try to communicate with the handler mapping. So basically, we need to send this particular request to the appropriate controller here. So to send this particular request here, so in between, between the controller and the request dispatches alert, so one important concept is going to play. So that is called handler mapping. So carefully observe here. I'm trying to define handler mapping here. So this particular handler mapping here, very important here. Now we can understand here, because the request we received from the UI. Now the request is handled by the dispatches alert. So dispatches alert is read the information which is coming from the UI page. So we need to communicate with the controller class, because in the real-time application we are not going to define the one controller. So we'll try to focus on the more controller classes. More than one controller we used to focus on the in our real-time application. Whenever we are trying to provide the more than one controller, so the request cannot directly communicate with the controller class, and the dispatches alert cannot communicate with the controller class. So in between, we are having one important concept called handler mapping. So what exactly this particular handler mapping will do? So based on this particular request here, so which is going to communicate with the appropriate controller class. So how it's going to communicate? Because in the request we try to provide the information. So where we want to connect, so it's like we try to provide the URL information. So the URL information which is going to handled by the handler mapping here. So we'll have a different types of handler mapping here. So we'll focus on the more. So what are the handler mappings are going to connect here, and what is the purpose of each handler mapping here. But now understand here, now the dispatcher service is received the request, and the dispatcher service is trying to connect with the handler mapping. So to find out the controller class, so that once the controller is identified, now what it will do, so it's going to connect with the controller class. So what it will do, the handler mapping, which is going to provide the information back to the dispatcher alert here. So what information which is going to provide? Basically, the controller class information which is going to provide. And now, so what we are doing here, dispatcher alert will connect it to the controller class. So from here, the dispatcher alert will connect to the controller class. So we'll define the more than one controller class. So we'll try to focus on the how this particular controller class we are going to define here. Okay, now understand here from the dispatcher alert, getting the point. This is very important here. From the dispatcher alert, we connected to the handler mapping to find out the particular controller class. So we find out the controller class. Handler mapping will return the particular controller class information. So again, dispatcher alert will connect it to the controller class. So carefully observe here, the dispatcher alert is connected to the controller class. So from the controller class, if we want to work with any databases, so what we are going to do, we try to connect with the service classes, and from the service classes, we try to focus on our database information. From the service class here, we try to connect it with our database here. So observe carefully. So these are the service classes here, and from the service classes, will connect with our database. So that is nothing but DB. Observe here. So dispatches are there. Now it is connected to the controller class. Once it is connected to the controller class, from the controller class, we'll try to focus on the service classes. And from the service classes, we'll try to connect with our database here. Getting the point. We'll try to connect with our database. So to store the data, to retrieve the data, whatever the operation we are performing here, so this is the block execution. From the controller, we connect it to the service. From the service, we connect it to the database. So from the database here, we used to return some value. We used to return some value. Now the value we return up to the controller class. If I'm going to return the same value to the dispatcher list, if I'm going to return the same value to the dispatcher list, so dispatcher list will get an like a dilemma. So in the which UI page I want to display this information here. Because now you can see from the home.html, from the home.html, we receive the request to the dispatcher list. From the dispatcher list, we are trying to perform those operations here, like we are connecting handler mapping. So from the handler mapping, we are connecting to the controller class. From the controller, we used to connect with the service. From the service, we connect with the database. Getting the point. Now you can see, now the database, we are returning some information. So here we are having return information, so which is written by the database. If I am going to return the same information to the dispatcher list, so dispatcher list cannot understand here where I want to display this information. Getting the point. So this section we are going to call as a model. So whatever the information we want to return back to the dispatcher list, so those information we are going to return as a model object here. We are going to return as a model object here. Getting the point. Now what we need to do? So in between, whatever the information we want to return back to the dispatcher list, with the help of this particular one more objective, so that is we are going to call as a, here we are trying to define here model and view. Model and view. So carefully observe here. So what we are going to do here. So basically, using this particular model and view, we can we'll try to return the model and view object to the dispatcher list here. So before returning here, now inside this particular controller class, what we need to do, because we identify some data is returning back, returning coming from the data is coming from the database. So the data we can store into the model object, and here we need to provide the view name here. So where this particular model data we want to show. Getting the point. So this is important here. In the which UI page we want to show this particular information, the UI page we are going to provide as a view object here. Getting the point. So this is very important here. So from the controller, we are constructing model and view object here. So inside the model and view object here, we need to provide the view name. And so inside the view, so what is the information we want to provide? So those information we are going to construct as a model object here. We are going to construct as a model object. So finally, now what we are doing here, from this particular controller class, instead of returning the raw data, what we are going to do, we'll try to return the model and view object here. So model and view object here. So based on this particular model and view object here, dispatcher list, which is going to connect it to the view resolver. Getting the point. So based on this particular model and view object, dispatcher will connect it to the view resolver here. So again, we need to understand here why dispatcher list is connecting to the view resolver here. So this is very important here, view resolver. Now, what we need to understand here, because in the model and view object, we are going to have a view name here. So from the view resolver, where exactly the view is reside, where exactly the view pages are located here. So that we are going to identify using this particular view resolver class. Getting the point? Basically, we are returning back as a model and view back object. Yes. Inside the model and view object, we are going to specify the view name. Based on this particular view name, dispatcher servlet will connect it to the view resolver object. Yes. And with the help of this particular view name, view resolver, which is going to provide the information where this particular views objects are reside. View objects is nothing but where this particular views are located. Is getting the point. So which is going to provide by this particular view resolver here. So once this particular view resolver provided the information, again the dispatcher servlet is going to connect it to the actual view where exactly the view is available here. So something called, here I want to provide something called login.html or something called register.js, some information here. So those informations are going to identify after communicating with the view resolver. After communicating with the view resolver, then only the dispatchers will understand where exactly the actual view objects are located here. Getting the point? So this is very important diagram we are trying to discuss here. Basically, if you are understanding this particular diagram, we can easily work with the Spring MVC application here. Because all these particular diagrams we are going to connect like we'll try to create objects based on this particular handle mapping and view resolver, model and view, and controller classes, service classes, and we'll try to work with the dispatcher servlet, and finally we'll try to work with the view resolver and the actual view names here. So this is very important diagram we are trying to discuss here. Yes, the handler mappings are going to work with request information, so which is going to find out where this particular request needs to connect it here, whether which method we need to call. Because on top of the method, if we identify in the real-time application, so we'll specify the path here. So instead of specifying the path, some application they will connect with the request mapping here. So these request mapping and paths are going to identify by the handle mapping only. And once this particular handle mapping identified, so we are going to connect it to our service classes and the database. And from the database, we'll try to return the data. Whenever we are trying to return the data, we need to provide the view information. Like the data, we need to return back to the view pages. So which view page we want to return? So that is going to provided by the view resolver here. So the response information we'll try to specify inside the view name, but to find out the view, which view we want to provide the response object, that is going to connect it as a view resolver here. So basically, we will provide the logical view name. Based on the logical view name, the dispatcher servlet, which is going to load the physical view name based on this particular view resolver. So we'll understand more whenever we are trying to write with the simple example here. Okay, so back to here. Any questions regarding this particular diagram here? This diagram very important here. So once we understand this particular diagram, we can work with a simple example here. So anyone having any questions, please let me know.
Sir?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the dispatcher servlet is the decision maker, right?
Yes.
Okay, so for both incoming and request and response, for both things, dispatcher is the decision maker of that application.
Yes. So like based on this particular dispatcher servlet only, we are going to work with the Spring MVC application here. So any request, the first is going to handle by the dispatcher servlet. So then it's going to find out where this particular request is to communicate with the appropriate controller class. And once the controller class returning the data, again the dispatcher servlet will connect it to the view pages here. So which view page we want to return the information as a response.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. So back to here. Now if we understand here, now how we can create this particular dispatcher servlet. Because we are understanding here, dispatcher servlet is our front controller which is going to handle each and every request here. So to create this particular dispatcher servlet here, first we need to create our application. So here we cannot work with this particular application. So let me see, do we have any option to convert this application into Spring MVC? So ID is not responding. So we'll try to find out here, do we have any option to convert? JavaScript, model info, GPU. No. So we don't have any option to convert. So let me create one more project here. Here we need to work with a dynamic web project here. So Spring MVC, I want to work here. So here we need to work with SRC main Java. So like whatever the classes we are going to write, we'll try to create inside this particular source directory. And I'm going to define one more inside this particular SRC main resource. Here we are going to provide our resource class information. Resource class information is nothing but we used to work with the Hibernate configuration or any, if we are having any string specific configuration, we are going to work with inside the resource directory. And after this, we'll try to work with web.xml. Let me finish this particular application. So once this particular web.xml is generated, so change the prospective here. Observe here, we created our Spring MVC application. Now what I want to do, I want to convert into Maven application here. So Spring MVC, group ID and artifact ID, we are going to work with same. Now, like previously, what are the jobs we use? So I want to copy all the jobs here. So this particular dependency section I want to copy. Okay. Now we added the particular job information. Let me close other classes here. Observe carefully. So once it is converted into the Maven application here, we are going to find out the inside the web content, web INF, we used to work with web.xml. So here, inside this particular web.xml, as of now, we don't have any information here. Only we are having welcome file. So other than this particular welcome file, we don't have any information. So let me comment out this particular welcome file here. Now, I want to work with the dispatcher servlet configuration here. So to work with the dispatcher servlet configuration, now what we need to do? We need to work with the tag called servlet list. Getting the point. So basically, this is the main tag. Inside this particular servlet, we used to work with the name of the servlet name. Now, so we need to provide the servlet name. Here I want to provide the spring. Here I want to provide the name of the servlet as a spring is, and later we want to provide the servlet class. Servlet class. So what is the servlet class? Basically, we need to provide the dispatcher servlet as our servlet class. So to work with the dispatcher servlet, first we need to find out whether we are having dispatcher servlet class information or not. Now you can see we don't have a dispatcher servlet class. Now what we need to do? First we need to copy the particular dispatcher servlet information. So to copy this particular dispatcher servlet information, now what we need to do? We need to copy the jar information. Spring MVC jar. So let me open the browser. So Maven repository. Yes, we need to work with the Spring MVC related jobs. So to work with MVC related jobs, let me try with the Spring MVC. Any jobs we are going to have. Now you can see Spring Web MVC. So which version we are working here? So we are working with the free version. I want to copy this particular Web MVC. Let me add into our existing. So once this particular jar is downloaded, now we need to understand here whether we are able to access the dispatcher servlet or not. So dispatcher servlet. Now you can see we are having this particular dispatcher servlet class. So where it is available, like name of the package. So this particular package is available inside this particular org Spring Framework .web.servlet. Getting the point. Now I want to provide this particular class information inside this particular web.xml. So because this is our front controller. This is the first request controller we are going to call, which is going to handle all the information. So we need to specify the class information with the help of the package name here, so that the Spring container can understand here where exactly this dispatcher servlet will reside here. Okay, we created this particular class and Spring name. Now, what I want to do? I want to provide the URL pattern, because the dispatcher servlet, which is the first controller which is going to handle all the requests here, but we want to provide like how the requests we are going to get and what kind of the request we want to handle here. Getting the point. So to specify the URL pattern here, now what I want to do? So we need to work with the URL pattern here. Now, after completion of this particular servlet, I want to work with the servlet mapping. Inside this particular servlet mapping, we need to provide the servlet name. Same servlet name we need to specify. Later, URL pattern. So basically, I'm giving an option here. I want to handle all the requests. Getting the point. I want to handle all the requests here. But sometimes what happens here, So some application they used to work with .htm or .htm or HTML something they used to work with slash app here. So whenever we are trying to work with this particular app or .html, we need to provide all the UI applications, sorry UI pages with the extension .html. Getting the point. So we don't want to work with those HTML extension here. You can take like whatever the extension you want here, but here we are giving an option here, any request. So any request is coming from the UI pages, we need to handle all the requests here. So this is a preferable way because we doesn't know so what kind of the request we are going to get, and we want to return back to the UI pages with the help of some of the responses here. We are going to work with a different type of the responses here. So that what we can do, we can work with the URL pattern slash here. So which is indicating here any request which is coming from the UI pages, which is going to handle by this particular dispatcher subject. So this is we need to create. Okay. Now we created this particular servlet and name of the servlet and URL pattern. Whenever we are trying to create this particular servlet name as a string here, basically in the Spring MVC application here, we need to work with the Spring configuration file with the help of the servlet name here. With the help of the servlet name only we need to create. Now observe here, I am trying to create our Spring configuration file. I am creating Spring configuration file here. So what is the name of the configuration file? So this is important here. We need to work with the Spring configuration file, which is going to start and starting the name which is going to start with the Spring servlet name. So that is called Spring servlet.xml. So this Spring we provided inside this particular web.xml. So we are working as the name of the servlet as a string. With the name of the servlet name, we need to create our configuration file. So that the container will look for this particular configuration file, will load this particular configuration file. So let me finish this particular configuration file. So after this, now what I want to do, I want to copy the information which we used in the previous example. That is nothing but Spring-Hibernate configuration. I want to copy this all the information into our Spring-Servlet.xml. Sorry. Servlet spelling we made wrong here. Rename. So let me change the servlet name. Okay. Now we copy the information. Correct the file. So now we understand here this file is going to provide the configuration information. So basically, like whatever the classes we are going to work, those classes information we are going to provide inside this particular configuration file. Getting the point. Now what I want to do, after creating this particular configuration, the dispatcher servlet information, we created the Spring configuration file. So inside this particular configuration file, we need to work with the XSD, something called Spring MVC. We need to work with XSD called Spring MVC here. So to work with this particular XSD, what I want to do, I want to provide the schema information, something called Spring-MVC. Spring-MVC. So which is very important here. Now what we can do, we can test this particular XSD file, whether this particular XSD is working or not. Whether the given XSD is not working or not, how we can test here? We need to copy the URL and we can paste it in the browser so that we can easily understand here how this particular access is working or not. So if it is working, we are going to find out the access the configuration information. Now let me copy the above one. URL is not finding. Why this particular URL is not finding here? Okay, not Spring MVC. Maybe. Okay. So basically, here we need to work with MVC. Here we need to work with the MVC, and which version we are working? Something called 3.0. So this is the 3.0. Now I want to copy this particular scheme. Let me paste it here. So this is the way we can check with whether the given access is working or not. Now finally, what I want to do, here I want to work with XML. I want to provide this particular MVC tag. So whenever I'm trying to provide this particular tag here, now what happens internally? So we can see some of the MVC related information. No, we are not getting any MVC related information. Why we are not getting any MVC related information? Let me try here. So no. Okay. Basically, it has to work with MVC. Let me try here. Yes. So here we need to provide the main configuration also. So then only we are going to work with. Now what I am trying to do, so we are going to work with annotation example here. So whenever we are trying to work with annotation example here, basically, so we need to provide some information here. So what are the information we need to specify here? What are the information we need to specify whenever we are trying to work with the particular MVC classes here? So now I want to provide this particular MVC annotation. Only one tag we can specify, something called MVC Annotation Reference, so that the container can understand we are working on the annotation example. Okay, so back to here. Now what I want to do, I want to create main controller classes here. So here I want to provide the package name com dot java technology dot. Here I want to provide the MVC, and here home controller. So first we try to understand the how we can return the home page. So we have the controller class we created here, and basically we understand in the previous example the stereotype annotation here, because we we implemented example on the component, service, and repository. So today we are going to work with the controller class. So the controller annotation. So where I want to provide this particular controller annotation, on top of this particular class, I want to provide the controller annotation. So let's see how we can provide the controller annotation here. Controller. So once we specify this particular controller class, now I can define one more method, so which is going to return string get home page. I want to return home here. I want to return home here, and here I want to make the request information using this particular request mapping. So I want to provide slash here. Getting the point. If I'm going to get any request, slash, I want to return the home page here. I want to return this particular home page here. So basically, what I want to provide here, whenever we are trying to work with this particular request mapping here, so now what I understand here? So dispatches are left internally, which is going to communicate with the handler mapping, right? So one of the handler mapping is going to identify this particular annotation here. One of the handler mapping which is going to identify this particular request mapping annotation here. So which handler mapping is going to identify? Okay. So before going to provide the handler mapping here, now we need to understand like how many handler mapping we are having. The first one here, bname handler mapping here. We are not finding here. So this is bname URL handler mapping. Getting the point. So this is one of the handler mapping here. Now you can see if I'm going to open here, so which is extending from the abstract delegating URL handler mapping, and what is the interface we need to understand here. Let's see. So still we are having these are the handler mapping here. Web application object support here. So this is the solid context aware. So this we already identified because this is the Beans life cycle interface here. Let's see. So this is I want to provide handler mapping. Getting the point. Handler mapping is the interface, and what is the implementation class here? So that is called bname URL handler mapping is the implementation class. So this is one of the implementation class. So what exactly which is going to understand here? So what is the purpose of this particular bname URL handler mapping? Basically, whenever if you want to make this particular request relation information, now what you can do? The bname URL handle mapping, which is going to check with the name of the bean. So home control is a bean class. So whenever we are trying to providing the request mapping same as the bean ID. The request mapping, if I'm going to specify as a bean ID, so internally we can connect it with the bean name URL handler mapping. And so this is the default handler mapping. If I'm not providing any handler mapping here, so default handler mapping is a bean name URL handler mapping here. So along with this, we are going to have another handler mapping here, simple URL handler mapping here. Simple URL handle mapping. So what exactly is the simple URL handle mapping will work? So basically you can define this particular URL using the properties and collection of objects here. So you can provide the request so URL information with the help of this particular properties and collection of objects here. So it's nothing but the primitive data type and object type we can work on this particular URL here. So let me provide this particular simple observe carefully, this is the simple URL handler mapping. So this is the one more class here. So this is the one more type we can call it as a. So based on this particular property type here, what happens internally? The dispatcher list which is going to connect it to this particular simple URL handle mapping, and the simple URL handle mapping is going to provide the appropriate controller information. Getting the point? So other than this, we are going to have another one annotation related here, because we are trying to work with annotation related. The request mapping is a annotation. So for this request mapping annotation, which handler mapping is going to work? And here we are having so default annotation handler mapping, basically which is going to map the request to the particular controller and the controller method here. So those are annotated with request mapping here. Getting the point? So which is going to work with controller class as well as the particular class method. So wherever we are trying to use this particular request mapping annotation, the default annotation handler mapping will come into the picture, and this particular default annotation handler mapping is going to take care of so identifying the controller class and identifying the appropriate method information here. Getting the point? So these are the handler mapping here. Now, so we are going to work with this particular default annotation handler mapping because we are working on the annotation example here. So something called request mapping here. Okay, now we identify how exactly the handler mappings are going to work here. So after the handler mapping here, now, so what exactly we need to understand here? So we need to understand the view resolver here, because from the help of this particular handler classes, now the dispatcher servlet is going to connect it to the controller classes, and from the controller classes which is going to call the appropriate method, and from the appropriate method now we are trying to return model and view object here. So as of now I am not constructing the model and view object here, so simply I am trying to return the logical view name. So that is nothing but home here. So with the help of this particular home, how dispatcher servlet is going to connect it to this view resolver here. How dispatcher servlet is going to connect it to the view resolver. So to find out the view resolver here, now what we need to do? So we are having different kinds of view resolvers here. So what are the view resolvers we are going to connect here? So basically, we'll try to focus on the default one. Very important, we are going to discuss something called internal resource. So internal resource view resolver. Now you can see, so this is the internal resource view resolver. Now we can see this particular resolver class is available in the package called web.servlet.view. Inside the view package, this class is available here. So what exactly this is going to work here? Based on this particular logical name, dispatcher servlet is going to connect it to the internal resource view resolver, because the internal resource view resolver, we are going to provide the information inside our Spring-servlet configuration file. Based on this configuration file, so the dispatcher servlet is going to connect it to the internal resource view resolver, and based on this particular internal resource view resolver, we are going to load the view pages. So where this particular view names are existed here. Getting the point? So this is very important here. Now to find out this particular view resolver here, what we need to do? So along with the internal resource view resolver, we are going to have different types of view resolvers here. So URL based view resolvers. Let me provide the different one. Now you can see another one, URL based view resolvers here. So you can see those are existed in the same package here. So these URL based view resolver also is available inside this particular package called org spring framework dot web dot sublet dot view. And another one we need to work with so be name view resolver. Be name view resolver. So this is also available in the same package here. So these are the different types of view resolvers here. But only we are going to work with the preferable here internal resource view resolver. So to find out the internal resource view resolver, now what we need to do? So basically we need to create the internal resource view resolver information inside this particular our configuration file. So let me provide the configuration. Here I want to provide the one more bean ID. Here I want to work with, sorry, we don't want to specify ID. Directly we can specify the class. Let me provide internal resource view resolver. Okay. And I want to work with packaging. So this is our packaging. Okay, we created this particular view resolver. Now, so what I want to understand here, so let me go to this particular internal resource view resolver class. Now you can see we are going to have two properties here. Where we are having two properties here. Required class view. Okay. Yes. So in the URL based view resolver, we are having prefix and suffix. So I want to add these two properties here. So how we can add this particular two information like prefix and suffix here. So to add this particular prefix and suffix here, now what I want to do, let me go to this particular configuration file. So in the basically in the resource view resolver class, we don't have a prefix and a suffix, but in the base class we are having prefix and suffix, so that we can access in the subclasses as well, right? So this is the inheritance concept here. So back to here, now what I want to do, I want to define one property here. Name of the property is, we are working with prefix here. Now I want to provide with value. So here prefix is nothing but we need to add the location of the file. We need to add the location of the file where this particular view files are existed. Getting the point? So this is important here. Wherever we are trying to create this particular view pages here, as a prefix, we are going to provide the path where this particular files are existed. Now observe carefully. I want to provide inside this particular INF. So inside the folder called WebINF, I want to create one folder called views. I want to create one folder class views. So this is the path here. Carefully observe here, inside this particular WebINF, I want to create a one folder, something called views here. Now you can understand here, we are having the view folder here. So inside this particular view folder, we are going to have the view pages here, and we need to provide with one more something called suffix here. Let me go back to the suffix here. I want to copy this particular suffix here. Back to here, suffix, and I want to provide the extension of the particular file. Extension of the particular file we want to specify. I am trying to work with .js. So this is a extension of the file. Now carefully observe here. So carefully observe. Again we go back to the home controller. So home controller which is trying to return this particular code. So now we understand here we are not returning model and view object. We are trying to return the only the view name here. So what is the view name we are trying to return? Something called home. So whenever we are trying to return this particular view name as a home here, the dispatcher servlet, what it will do? It's going to communicate with the view resolver. So what is the view resolver? We are trying to working in something called internal resource view resolver. Internal resource view resolver. So what exactly the internal resource view resolver is doing is, so it's going to providing the prefix and the suffix. So what exactly is the prefix is contained? The prefix contains where this particular view pages are existed, and the suffix contains extension of the file here. Now if I'm going to add both information, so what happens internally? So observe carefully. So the internal resource view resolver, which is going to provide like this. Finally, which is going to provide webinf views home.js. Getting the point. So which is going to construct like this, and after constructing this particular file, it's going to return back to the dispatcher servlet. And the dispatcher servlet, what it will do? It will go into this particular path of the webnf folder, and which is going to load the home.jsp. This particular home.jsp is going to return as a response, and if I'm going to add any the model object, the model object also is going to add it into this particular file. Getting the point? So this is going to constructed dynamically based on this particular view name. Based on this particular view name, this particular path and the extension, like the suffix is going to constructed here. Okay, now we understand here. We understand the path of construction and everything. But here, what we need to do? We need to create a home.jsp. Here, I want to create a one JSP file inside the folder called views folder. So what is the name of the JSP file I want to create? Something called home.jsp. So let me finish this particular home.jsp. Okay. So basically, we are getting an error here. We need to resolve this particular error. So to resolve this particular error, now what I want to do, I want to add servlet jar here. So I want to add servlet jar here. So how we can add this particular servlet jar? So to add, first what we can do, we need to find out this error in the Google. So what exactly which is indicating this? Observe carefully. The superclass build is not finding here. So what exactly which is going to return? Now you can see how we can resolve this particular error. So with the help of Apache Tomcat. So as of now, we did not add a Tomcat here. Basically, I forget to explain here. Spring MVC applications are going to run inside the server here. So we can work with the Tomcat server here. Let me check with the Tomcat server. So to go back to the Tomcat server, what I want to do, inside this particular server, I want to add server. So Apache server I want to add, and version 9 I am trying to add here, where this particular server is existed. Go back to here, Apache 9. I want to add this particular server here, so which is not responding here. Okay, finish. Now you can see we are adding the server. So if it is refreshing the server adapter list is. So once it is completed, now we need to understand here whether this particular error is going to resolve or not. If it is not resolving, so we need to take the help from the Google. So why I'm trying to take the help from the Google? So if you are able to get any exception, getting the point. So the same way you can work with the Google to find out the resolution here. So this is also very important here. In the real time, finding the solution also very important here. Not only the developing application here, sometimes if I'm going to get any exception here, the find outing the particular exception is also very important here. So because of this, we used to communicate with our Google to resolve the particular appropriate issue. Okay. Now what I want to do, I want to run this particular server. Let me save the changes. What happened? Server cannot be started because one or more the port is invalid. Open the server. One or more ports are invalid. Okay. Let me change the port information. Here I want to check with 8181. I change this particular port information here. Now again we need to run the server. Let me run the server. The Tomcat server is running. Okay. So starting Tomcat server. Now you can see server is started. So it is running in the which port? So which is running in the port called 8181. Cutting the point. Now we need to check with the 8181 port. Okay. Now we added this particular server here. But now what I want to do, whether this particular, now, as of now, the error is not yet resolved. Now what I want to do, I want to click on the properties and go to the project facts, go to the runtime here, click on this particular Tomcat, show all the runtime errors, apply and close. Now you can see the error is resolved. So what I want to do, I want to work with the H1 tag here. Yes, I want to provide welcome to Spring MVC. I want to work with the simple message welcome to Spring MVC. Let me run the same example by commenting all the other information. Transaction finder, Hibernate. I want to comment about everything. Only internal resource view resolver and annotation. So along with it, we need to work with one more here, context here. XMLNS colon context here. Component scan. Com dot Java technology dot. What is the name of the package we are using? MVC. Because we are trying to work with a zero type annotation, so we need to specify the base package information so that the container will create a object. Okay, back to here. Let me run the same example using run as server. Run on server, we need to work on this same example. Spring MVC application we are trying to work with. So we'll observe whether we are going to get any error or not. I'm expecting I added everything. We cannot get any exception here. But we'll see. Okay. We are getting 500 here. Why we are getting the 500 error? Illegal argument exception. Simple metadata reader. Maybe we could not have this particular class. We need to read this particular error here. Fail to read the candidate component Spring and Spring Boot 7. General Chrome controller class nested exception. New version is not. This is because of version here. I want to use 1.7. No errors. Now we understand. So which is going to give any error, it's going to work. Now we can see we are getting an welcome to Spring MVC. How it is loaded here. How it is loaded here. Getting the point. So this is very important here. Now what we need to understand here. So first we need to understand very carefully here. So we given as a class request here. Up to Spring MVC, this is our application URL and application name. And after this, what we given here? Slash here. Whenever we are trying to work with the slash here, what happening internally? This particular controller class is going to call. What you are asking? The URL is not showing any file name. So which URL you are talking about? No, localhost home.jsp will not show you. So basically, now we are inside this particular webinar folder. We are going to get some security here. So this information we cannot show on the UI pages here. Sorry, on the browser here. But now we can understand very carefully here. Up to this is the package here. So this is the package here, and the application URL and name of the application name. We given the slash request. So whenever we are trying to given this particular slash request here, what happening internally? We are going to communicate with the help of this particular handle mapping. So which handle mapping we are connecting here? So default annotation handle mapping. Now what is doing here? Which is connecting this particular method is returning the home. Whenever this particular home is returning, we identified internally. So this is a structure. The home page is going to load. when the home page is going to load, what happens internally? The dispatch servlet is going to return the home page. It's going to return the home page here. It's not going to return the path here. Right. And so whatever the information we are having inside this particular home page, because we are trying to return this information as a response, and we are giving an option here. So which JSP page we want to show us in the browser here. We want to show home.jsp page as a response here. Getting the point. But we are not going to show the page name here. The home.jsp we are not going to show. Just we are going to show the whatever the content which is available inside the home.jsp, the content we are going to show here. So this is the dispatcher servlet is going to take care of returning the data and showing on the browser here. Because of this, we are not going to get any home.jsp files information here. So if we want to get this home.jsp, now what we need to do? We need to change in the browser here. Dot extension will change here. Because I given as a slash here. Because we are going to connect it to the all the requests here. And it is not a good to show the UI pages in the header section. So any questions? Okay, so we'll try to check with the remaining example on the Monday class. So basically, now we identified how the simple request is coming here. And so in the Monday class, what we are going to do, we try to create some fields here, some like editable fields. We are going to provide some information. So whether those information is going to storing in the database or not, we are going to identify. Once identified here, we are going to validate some of the fields information. Later, we are going to connect it to the string security here. Once the MVC is completed, we are going to connect it to the string security here. After completion of this particular string MVC, we are going to connect it to the string security. Okay, so if you don't have anything, we are going to conclude the today class. We'll continue on Monday. So this is very important, the Spring MVC example we are discussing, and try to practice so that you are going to understand how this particular Spring MVC is going to work, and how this particular handed mapping are working, and how this particular resource classes are working. View resolvers, not resources. View resolvers classes are working internally. We are going to have an understanding here. So we try to work with log4j also, how exactly the objects are creating internally. We can easily understand here. So that we can check in the Monday class.